tries to help people find jobs in tech, I can maybe say that I think the biggest issue is really skills in the area. Like you've touched on a couple of times, you know, the funding is there, the interest is there, there's projects people want to do, there's a huge lack of skills. I think there's only about 1,000 people that call themselves data scientists in South Africa, which is actually very little. So, like initiatives like around that are just trying to grow the community and build the community is obviously very welcome. On the business side of things, like Dan Ariely had this great quote that he said that data science is a bit like teenage sex. Everybody's talking about it. Nobody quite knows what it is. Everybody thinks everybody else is doing it, so they should be doing it also. And I think the situation is a little bit like that. Judging by the companies that I talk to, they are very interested in data science, AI. They want to do things, but they don't quite know what exactly they want to do about it. And that's one of the things we can also help educate them. If we go and implement projects, we go and talk about them and share the success stories.
Awesome. Thank you very much for that, Helge. I just want to get to the audience again.
So you'll pick up just by listening to me talk for a couple of seconds that I'm American. But I've been
Happy
living...
4th of July.
Thanks. But I've been living here in the Western Cape for the past 3.5 years, and what's been strikingly apparent to me is this notion of innovation born from necessity, and the fact that some of the hottest startups, let's say in the US, is like the next best photo sharing app. Do we need more of that shit? I don't think so. Pardon my language. But whereas, on this continent, some of the hottest startups are solving real world problems. And so that leads to my question around SDGs, which is the language of nonprofits, academics, which in my mind is sort of this hard line between the language that the corporates and the businesses speak. And do we need a new model, or is there an opportunity to create a common language so that it's not you're on this side and your goals are X, Y, Z around SDGs versus you're on this side of the plane and it's all about your profits and revenues. It just seems like there's an opportunity, given that the goals are converging around what we want to achieve, and should there not be a shared language, should there not be a shared model where funding comes from the conversation around funding and the conversation around resources comes from the same place. I don't know if that makes any sense.
Can I take that?
It makes a lot of sense, and I've got feedback, but I know Oni's got maybe better feedback.
I was super embarrassingly interviewed by a friend of mine for a paper about 2 years ago, right after the SDGs came out, about 6 months after. And they replaced the MDGs, the Millennium Development Goals, which were by and large pretty much a failure. And so she interviewed me and she said, are investors and corporates, taking up this banner of SDGs? And I said, absolutely not. No one's talking about them. Like, it's not a thing. No one's adapting them. And so this went into this paper. And I have to say now, hey, that's really embarrassing, and I hate that that's in print, because 2.5 years after really the adoption of the SDGs, it's a common language, actually. I have to say, the MDGs were not. Those of you, probably no one has actually heard of the MDGs, the Millennium Development Goals, because they were not talked about. For some reason that I don't actually know, the SDGs are starting to be, if you look in corporate reports, you're starting to see them in corporate financial reports, you're starting to see them in financials of the top investment firms in the world. So I think you're right, we actually needed a new common language, and for better or for worse, and I do think for better, the Sustainable Development Goals have become something that have become a common language. No one knows the 17. I can't even name all 17. But people start talking about and are starting to do. I have a good friend of mine runs a wealth management firm in the UK. They do their entire clients' portfolios based on the SDGs. They're the first ones in the world to do that. But you're going to start seeing, if you don't already, them within common corporate language. So corporates are starting to look at CSR around the SDGs. They're starting to look at their underlying profits around the SDGs. So I think you're very right. We needed something new. And so the next stage of this is going to be as corporates start to evaluate internally how much the SDGs are going to cost them if they don't achieve them. So, and again, this is they. So it's like, it's starting to be something where I see the world starting to talk about, if we don't achieve the SDGs, how much is it going to cost us? Not how much, it's going to be, there's going to be this like mythical billions of dollars it's going to cost. Corporates are starting to say, right, if we don't achieve access to water in our areas that we serve from a geographic perspective, it's going to cost us this much because people aren't going to have this. And so I think that starting to internalize some of those costs is going to be the way that corporates look at it. And then from an investment perspective, it's hard to find an investor these days that doesn't at least have some general knowledge around the SDGs. And a lot of investors are starting to create, there's new funds that have been created, there's whole investment platforms that are being built on them. So it's not saying it's all hunky-dory and everyone's holding hands and singing Kumbaya, but I much more so than any other type of development language is there starting to be an adoption, and I think it's good. I mean, some of them are funny, but it's good. Yeah, please.
So I spend a lot of time talking to corporates and listening to their problems, and I think one of the things about I think when you work in this space, or any space actually, you take for granted what you think a corporate knows and what they think they know. And to use a Donald Rumsfeld, a lot of corporates don't know what they don't know. Okay, so when you talk to a corporate and you go there with your shiny new AI app, and they go, "That's really great, Nick. Well, I'm only interested in the price of diesel in my logistics chain." Right? And I'm quoting from having a meeting with quite a large retailer here about that, and that very discussion. So you go in with your big bang, we're going to save planet or whatever app using data science and whatever thing it is, and actually the corporates are like years kind of looks like they're dinosaurs and they're worried about all these other things because their supply chain can't break and it's got to do da-da-da-da. So it's how do you get their attention?
They're not dinosaurs, they just have a different set of things that they worry about.
Yeah, exactly. So how do you get their attention to have that conversation? Do you get them out, step out of the office and go to a hotel in Waterfront and talk about these things? Yeah. Do you go and knock on the door and present a doomsday scenario that if you don't do these things, the ocean will be boiled and we'll all die? So I think we need to have a much more inclusive discussion around that, but you also need to get people's attention. And in this kind of busy world we live in, getting people's attention is actually one of the hardest things to do. So I think that's also a challenge we need to address to move towards some of these goals.
I'd love to jump in. My name is Lloyd. I'm here with Robin. We're from a version 2 startup called ReportFast, which is very related to what this last conversation is about. ReportFast guides companies through the reporting process, from resource management reports, carbon footprint, sustainability reports, and integrated reports. And so my question was going to be, which I think Nick was also asking us back in a way, was going to be, so in our experience, there are 3 drivers of sustainability. There's values, which is let's do it because it's the right thing to do. There's compliance, let's do it because we have to do it. And then there's the business case, which is let's do it because it's good for business. We're finding that the strongest emerging driver is the business case. And it is,
not surprised.
It used to be compliance, and it still is a great force. Sustainable stock exchanges are mandating reporting, and that's driving a culture of transparency and accountability. But if you're talking about sustainable development goals, to me the gap is about how to translate the business case into those outcomes. And my question for the panel is, how can AI do that?
Okay, let's take that one.
So what I've seen so far is that financial markets take into account a lot of data, but often one of my favorite accounting colleagues up at Oxford says that it's not externalities, it's things we have externalized. And I think that one of the ways in which corporates are going to see a business case, and are already starting to, is the ways in which they can use machine learning to understand reams of data that fall outside their normal purview. So you're seeing investment firms create indices and strategies whereby they're investing in companies that are the most sustainable or the most innovative or the most resource efficient. And they're creating alpha, which in the financial world means to have returns above the market. And so then corporates see that. And they say, oh, well, what other data should we be thinking about that we're not already thinking about? And so I think that there's too much data to look at it from a traditional perspective. So teaching these algorithms to understand things that are more social and environmental in nature will help them to make better business decisions. And I think also one of the things that we've seen in the past kind of 10 to 15 years is this understanding of the poor as a consumer and a producer as opposed to a beneficiary. And I think that's something that most corporates are still getting their head around. And so I think artificial intelligence can help them to build capabilities to be able to address types of consumers they're not used to. And I think that's through ranking, which Hilda works with, figuring out how to understand priorities, and then also to using the types of geospatial technology that help them to target things and to understand what their risks are. So geospatial technology is really important for insurance companies, for big financial institutions to understand, what are their risks around climate change, what are their risks around social unrest even, used to a slightly less precise degree. But I think there's going to be a lot of applications for using new types of data that corporates really haven't paid attention to otherwise.
Yeah, great question. I think it actually speaks to the topic of what we're talking about in general, not just business good and sustainable development goals, but how do we align the two and make them common. I won't name the company, but I did a project for business, and turned out they were using something for 3 years that was based on data 2 years previous to when they started it. So it hadn't changed in 5 years, but it probably should have, right? So I think AI is going to enable this continuous engagement with data, and or continuous data, if you were. And I think a lot of this social consciousness is being driven by millennials, younger generations, but and that of course feeds back into older generations as well. There's a whole bunch of back and forth, so I won't say specific age groups per se. But what that really means is that you need to tap into what's going on at the moment, and what is true now is not going to be true next year. And so I think AI is going to empower this feedback into, okay, what do people want now, and what are they going to want to try to predict that, but more importantly, you can tap in to see what they want in a somewhat continuous fashion. And considering that people are becoming socially conscious, more socially conscious at least in the past few decades, I think that it's going to be more and more in line with the Sustainable Development Goals. So businesses see that a lot of their underlying data for their customers happens to be in line with social consciousness of the Sustainable Development Goals, then they should align their business drives with those goals through the customers, essentially. So it'd be an indirect, but the way AI empowers that is providing a continuous feedback with the underlying consumer data. Does that kind of make sense?
Just a point there, basically. So with our work with government, basically, there's been a huge drive for open data, and we push it hard because every time we get appointed on a project, we're regurgitating the same data from scratch and not evolving it to the next level. I think that needs to be pushed harder from a bottom-up perspective, where the people living in the metropolitans and the towns are pushing for the data to be opened. Through that, you're going to find more collaboration within the corporates, where they will have access to information to make better decisions going forward that impacts their business case. But at the same time, too, it impacts the people living in the metropolitans basically directly, where they can see through open transition, basically, they can see what is actually the decisions being made. For a long time, appointments are being made to corporate environments to do work within government, and they hold a bit of a stronghold over the company because no one else can do it, and they keep the data and their methods basically in a proprietary format, which is not open and lacks development that way because they want to keep control of it. With an open data perspective, that opens that door through collaboration and transparency, where people can actually have an opinion towards how it's being handled. In sense of sustainability, basically, and I think businesses will take it on because they can only value from it, grow from there, and having access to that information which they don't currently have. I mean, I'm speaking from experience in our own company. There's a lot of silos in the sense of holding onto information, and it's only once you open it up you realise what is available and what you can actually do with it. And the more we can open it up, the more there's going to be opportunity for businesses and the people living within those communities.
I think when you look at big corporates, so the guys that are building skyscrapers in Santon, so Ernst & Young, banks, they've got lots of money, they can throw huge resource at this problem or opportunity, if you want to call it that. And my reference client is the guy in Pardon Island who makes aluminium ladders, who employs 200 people, because that broadly makes most of the economy, SME type companies. And if you think about an organisation like that, thinking how can they use AI, I mean, it's a bit like asking the question, how can you use coal, or how can you use electricity? When electricity was first invented, it wasn't even for power, it was for light. And powered appliances didn't come along for some time after that. And there's a great TED talk by Jeff Bezos on that, so if anyone wants to watch it, it's definitely worth, it's quite enlightening. So I think we're at that kind of, what can we do with AI? We're at that kind of, what can we do with electricity? I think we know we can do certain things with it now, and there'll be, in 10 years' time, there'll be a whole new series of things that we can do with this. And by that time, the guy who employs 200 people in Pardon Island that makes aluminium ladders will be embracing it in a black box format. When you plug in a hairdryer, well, I don't do that anymore, I've done that for a while, you don't think about, I wonder how this electricity was generated and what model do they use in the phasing. You just plug it in, you dry your hair, and you go out, and life carries on. And I think we'll get to a point where everybody, it'll just be like, well, I don't want to use the CEO of Google's phrase, but it will be like electricity. It will just be a thing that is there and does things for you, like makes appointments or drives the car or reads a book. And I think the other thing was, I wanted to add on that, is the generation that we have coming to adulthood. My friend's 4-year-old talks, he's a big CIO in a gaming company in London. Sorry, the CIO, yes, intelligent, prescient, savant, who runs a company. It's a 4-year-old, his 4-year-old daughter talks to Alexa every day, like a friend, like an entity. And in 14 years' time, that girl will be an adult, going to college or maybe going to work or setting up her own company or going to university or whatever. So what will happen in 14 years' time when that person has become an adult versus what's happened in the last 3 years with deep learning? And so the amount of change that's going to happen in this next 14 years is going to be mind-blowing. And those adults coming, and I don't even know what those adults are going to be, what are they called? Super.
They don't have a name yet.
They don't have a name yet, right? Super millennials or something, I don't know. Whatever they are. Well, we know millennials are quite demanding. I mean, what kind of people will they be? They will be expecting just to talk to things. And we need to be prepared for that. And I'm not even sure 14 years is long enough, given how slow things move in industry or commerce. And these things are are pervasive. They're all around us. Maybe not so in South Africa because we're a little bit behind on the consumer curve with products coming to the country, but they're coming in. The devices are coming. So I think there is this interesting blurring between your home life, your work life, business, and how they will view the use of these technologies, because they will be black box and you won't think about what's going on behind them, and you will talk to it and you will respond to it and you will use it without thinking. So I think we all have to be cognizant of that, because it's a massive change that is happening now and will carry on. So.
And you'll phone your grandchild if you can't work it.
I know we don't have time to talk about it here, but it is just worth thinking about all these things. And one of the SDGs is social justice, and there's a real big issue with the data that the historical data that artificial intelligence is using to make predictive choices. So whether or not you're thinking about things like criminal justice or even things like urban planning, so it's a much longer conversation, this panel, but it is worth thinking about. There's a lot of social justice advocates that are out there really pressing for us, and even the designers. So most data scientists in the world are white males between the age of 24 and 35, and even the way in which they're coding has impacts on biases. And so I think that there needs to be a very big discussion around what data are we using, how are we cleaning it, how are we coding it, and then how are we trusting the predictive nature of it. And even you can think about things that are coming from Silicon Valley into emerging markets. So there's certainly an excellent piece about working with African coders in Africa to build things that work for the continent, but we have to make sure that those are also representing individuals and aren't making decisions. So if we're going to start trusting machines to make decisions, we need to be able to question them or even understand what's in the black box, so we don't just take it at face value. And it's going to be a really important conversation going forward.
An important point on that is open source, basically, is going to play a very, very important role for Africa. We have to realize that the first world countries are ahead of us when it comes to AI. And there's a huge challenge between the US and China at the moment in the sense of trying to be the lead when it comes to AI innovation. And if for us to play a part of that and to be ahead in the sense of Africa, with the basis of our education system being lacking and the lack of information, we need to collaborate in the sense of an open source environment, sharing ideas and collaborating. I think transparency, specifically within the businesses in Africa and South Africa, and the sharing of information is going to play a vital important role with that.
Cool. Again, talking about collaboration quickly as well, to echo what they're saying, is I see a lot of these institutes popping up across the world, and it's called like Global Council of AI Experts or something. It's something like that. And it's you see who's in it, and it's like MIT, Harvard, Oxford. And it's like, oh, okay, so all the top universities, and it's global because they have 2 continents, right? So there's a two-sided thing there. Is us as South Africans, for example, we need to approach these organizations, these collaborations, and actively be involved in them. But that also then sets a precedent for them to include South Africa or other African countries or other developing countries, right? I went to a conference recently, 1,500 people. I was the only South African, computational neuroscience, maybe not quite the same demographic as machine learning, but very similar. And I was the only South African, and I'm pretty sure I was the only African. There were 2 people of color there who were both American, right? So I went to the organizer, I'm like, why is this the case? And it's prohibitively expensive for South Africans to go through. I was lucky enough to go through because I had money in reserve from part-time work, but a lot of students don't, right? They can't do this. A friend of mine who is in Nigeria and got accepted to a conference as an oral presentation in Germany, got funding for it from the conference, had the funding organization pay money into his account, got his visa denied because it wasn't, I can't remember the term they used, but it wasn't like convincing enough that he went, right? Which is really strange. So I think there needs to be a collaboration between these initiatives, international initiatives, and they can't just be the ones to say this is how things are going to go, or this is what we think is important. African voices need to be heard loudly, and I think people like Jacques, who's traveling a lot. Every time I email him, he's in a different country, and it's ultimately regardless of skin color, who building these initiatives. I'm very consciously aware that I'm a white male between 24 and 35.
Sorry, you are good.
But I make a point to tell other people, look, you need to grow it in general and focus on where you need to. And I think being aware is important as well, and I think collaboration needs to be done more proactively.
Absolutely. It would be totally better if more people that were, it looks like you like that.
Can I just add on that point there, Jacques? Just quickly, there is a lot of interest from external agencies in South Africa and Africa and what's going on here. I mean, I just somehow got invited to brief the Swiss delegation on the AI landscape in Africa by a lady that just rang me up randomly, and I'm still not sure how that happened. But there are, I think again it goes back to kind of assumptions and understanding what is going on dynamically. There are a lot of countries interested in collaborating, but it's actually trying to tap into understanding who they are and then who is the right person to speak to, because trust me, this is a full-time job for me at the moment, and it is difficult. Now, we have the UK DIT presenting at the Expo, and they are proactively trying to encourage people to go to the UK to do data science, blockchain and fintech, and it's fully funded, and they want to share that with you, and they've got millions and millions of pounds to spend on that. But again, how do you translate someone turning up at a show for 30 minutes to tell you about this initiative into something concrete? So I think that, and just on that one last point, I bumped into a guy at the Indaba X, and he was just sort of creeping around the edges, and he's an American guy, and ex-investor, and sort of smartly dressed, so he stood out a little bit in a student crowd. And I said, what the hell are you doing here? And he says, I'm looking for talent, and I'm here to invest in social good programs. And he's just shuffling around and chatting to people. So there are people here looking and talking and wanting to collaborate, but part of it's serendipity. You'll meet them by accident in the edge of Indaba at the coffee urn, or they're quite large and you can try and tap into them, but it will require time and effort to track the right person down and then make that happen. So again, we're trying to connect people up in our community to these opportunities. We're hoping the Swiss ambassador will be at our event as well, and the UK Consulate General, and we are trying to make these things happen. So watch our announcements on that.
Just quickly on that, by the way, it's getting late as well, so we're probably going to finish up with a few questions there as well. I just want to quickly comment, Chris, you mentioned, well, I think everybody talked about inclusion, like Oni as well specifically. I was last year invited by Harvard University. It was a conference in Rio de Janeiro on AI and inclusion. And what was fascinating there was, you talked about different people and so forth, but it was quite interesting to see obviously ethics and law, some other, normally when I go to conference, I've been to so many conferences, machine learning, AI conferences, all of those type of things, you see all the technical people. But at that particular conference, it was like all the other disciplines, and it was fascinating just talking to all these other people around AI. It's obviously becoming such a huge hype. So I think there's going to be, and what's fascinating, if you think about inclusion, and one of the Sustainable Development Goals is also gender equality as well. And at that conference, there was a lot of female women as well. And I think specifically from, if you think about ethical stuff and law and the human side and so forth. So I think AI is going to bring in more people from different areas. And it's not just data science. I think it's going to be different roles carved out as part of producing solutions as well. So even at Cortex Logic, we think about all the different types of roles, and there's even developers turning them into data science developers, or now we will have roles around ethics and more domain-specific things as well. So I think it's going to be a very interesting world. Anyway, questions. We're going to end in a few minutes, so let's do it. Okay.
Okay. I don't want to talk a lot. I just want to say one of the other challenges looking at the other side is it looks like we are one or two young people here, and how do you kind of inspire young people to be agents of change? And how do you sustain the African continent? I myself, as an individual who is devoted to the well-being of this continent, it's quite challenging, but I think there's something that we can ponder on, looking at how do we inspire the young people, because and how do you change the mindsets, because they want it in the spoon, in the plate. So that's one a challenge. And I just want to say the second thing is that my last contribution is that thank you so much for this opportunity, because I think we need more of this engagement to be able to share, to collaborate, and to share knowledge and to learn from each other. Thank you.
Awesome. Thanks.
So my background is finance. I was in banking before, and
We've all been there.
But this year I embarked on an entrepreneurial journey in fintech, and I wanted to understand what are the bottlenecks to being an entrepreneur, and going through the government funding processes and all of that. And I found that a big issue is the lack of digitization and lack of automation. And I've probably handled more paper applying for government funding than I have in my previous role, you know. So my question is more around how can we work as a community of tech entrepreneurs to speed up the process of government digitizing, because in terms of sustainable development goals, digitization is one of the highest contributors to sustainability. So in essence, we collectively need to push governments to speed up the digitization process, essentially.
Can I answer that one? I actually have an answer for you.
I wanted to understand.
I want you to start doing it. Okay.
And then on that open data portal, what's the bottleneck there in getting more data that's accessible for everyone? Is it the data capturing, or then do we have to go up to governments and, for instance, say, must we change your whole system? Because I had a friend previously who just came back from business school and didn't have medical aid and got sick. Went to a hospital, had to go to a public hospital, and that experience was just, it was a bad experience for him. And that's these issues of lack of automation, lack of digitization, getting misdiagnosed there, all these issues. So it's more of just, I think, sorry, because you, yeah, and Nick, you started the AI Expo event, which is going to create this channel to communicate. I think it's quite important that the community pushes this digitization of government.
So I think we should start a...
Fully agree.
There's a...
Let me give you a mic.
Okay.
There's a company that I have interacted with in the past. It's called Code for America. And it's a wonderful female entrepreneur that started it, and they both volunteer and paid work on essentially speeding up government processes using traditional digitization as well as artificial intelligence and a little bit of blockchain, not much yet. But I think we need to start a Code for Africa. I think there's so much possibility around not just doing digitization, but actually starting to use some of these exponential technologies within government sources. And to your point around the black box, all of the work that I've ever done around anything with blockchain and in communities, they don't care, rightfully, we don't care about what it looks like in the back end, but does it work? And so I think getting to government to say, listen, we can do something where, and again, this is a little bit different here, right? We can do something where you don't need 20 people to look at something. They might still want 20 people to look at something because that's 20 jobs. But really doing things that are exciting for young people to be able to get involved. Code for America uses volunteers. They have paid staff. People get involved. They do hackathons. They work on specific government programs, and they design and develop really impressive programs for government. And so I think there's nothing to say that we couldn't copy that model and make it more effective. But I think that's something I'd love to see.
Yeah, I mean, sharing my own entrepreneurial journey. When I came in 2011, started from scratch. I didn't know anyone. I had no school network, no friends network. And carved out a business from scratch, grew to 22 people, and that was hard work. And that almost killed me. I mean, it was any entrepreneur building a business here. I think about 4 years in, I read a statistic that South Africa has the second highest business failure rate in the world. And if you make it beyond 3 years, you've done quite well. So I was in year 4, so I thought, maybe if I'd read that report before I started, I wouldn't have started. But there is no easy way to go through the journey. The hardest part is starting, and then the next hardest part is your first invoice, and the next hardest part is then going from one person to 2 people. Unless, of course, you get funding, and typically that won't happen here in a low-risk environment until you'll post revenue, or you've a super-duper algorithm that's going to change the world, and then someone wants to buy it. But I think the journey's hard, and the red tape isn't going to go away. I mean, I didn't have an ID until the beginning of this year, so you can't even open a bank account without an ID. I don't know if anyone knows that. You guys have all got IDs. I'm also surprised at the number of people that never respond to email. Right? I began to think I've got a complex. It's me. I'm a freak. This bold English guy who turns up. And culturally, doing business here is not like America. It's not like Europe. Culturally, people, when they're running a business, they've got 2 other businesses going on the side. A business is a side job. I think to be a successful entrepreneur, it should be your only focus. You should only have one business because you need to focus on it. And the journey to exit is not, it can be planned, and in our case it was accidental. We were trying to partner and grow our business, and the partner wanted to buy us. That wasn't in the plan. So I think it's a kind of serendipitous journey which isn't easy, and you've got to stick at it, and the red tape isn't going to disappear. And can you go to government and get rid of that? Good luck. I don't think it's going to happen for a while.
Just
not to comment on the other one is also red tape, but also the discipline, because entrepreneurs like discipline. They become too comfortable and then they start partying, not to focus on the business. I think the other one is discipline from us as entrepreneurs.
So a suggestion I have to the community is, why is it that we don't open AI and crowdsource it basically using blockchain? So the problems that we have, and which we foresee we have basically within local government, since digitalisation, we can drive it basically from an open AI's perspective. It forces government to look at it basically because of the cost, and it also removes the sense of transparency, ensuring that people are all, everyone's basically included in the sense of it's not exclusive only to the bigger corporates at the end of the day.
Hopefully it sounds like Cindy. I'm going to tie in a few threads there and start with an anecdote of there's more paper now in a digitized world than there was in a pre-digitized world, right? So the more emails you have that you're saving paper for, the more it needs to get printed out for some reason. It's a really strange type of circumstance. So it's kind of like this counterintuitive effect of if you digitize more things, you're actually going to use more paper. Because they think we're not using paper, and then someone's like, oh man, I have to print this, but most people aren't aware of that. Okay, and then also, so you spoke about education, how do you get people to be excited about it? And then you also spoke about entrepreneurship, and how is that driven, right, and various things there. And I think one way to try and combine those two would be AI is a really good business opportunity at the moment, if you can think of a really cool application for an AI system, and I know a few people in university, even at the end of IT in high school, if you can be like, look, if with your algorithm you can make money, therefore you should probably pursue AI at a younger age, that would A, encourage them to pursue AI, and B, encourage them to be entrepreneurs. And maybe they'll do AI because it's for the money, or maybe they'll do it because they enjoy it. But either way, you only have somewhat both circumstances there. So I think that's one approach. Another approach is there's been some pop-up models, if you were, of peer-to-peer learning in South Africa and in Africa. When we talk about MOOCs a lot, right? We haven't spoken about MOOCs at all today, but I talk about MOOCs a lot, and it's a lot about...
MOOC is a massive open online course, a free course online.
And a MOOC is a... thank you. And they're often university-focused type levels of content, and they're meant to be bite-sized. But what a barrier is A, internet, but B, also the content. A lot of people in, my experience in South Africa, a lot of the students, they'll go to school and they'll go, but their teachers won't show up. So what some of them have done is start doing like a peer-to-peer learning experience, where some students from higher years will teach students from younger years, okay? And then they don't need a teacher throughout the entire process, and then they can leverage each other's skills. So using the existing infrastructure of a MOOC that works internationally, although it has a large drop-off rate, I think needs to kind of be changed in an African context to suit our African needs. I think really leveraging that pit.
Cool. I also want to address your question around how do you get young people excited and interested in AI data science. And I think one thing is that like everybody uses this technology every day. Like, everybody uses Google, they find things on Wikipedia. But it's just maybe not that transparent that there is data science and there's artificial intelligence sitting behind that. So I think just explaining that and showing the process how that happens, that's one of the things. If we think about sort of young people at universities, I think definitely the interest in entrepreneurship and startups is a lever one can definitely use there. I mean, startups are very hot. AI startups is probably the most hottest thing there is. So if we can also create excitement and teach entrepreneurs about AI data science, and also teach developers to think in those terms, that is a lever one can use. Just to go back to that, this lady at the bank's question initially about a sort of Silicon Valley type startup. A lot of them are kind of sort of marginal improvements of things that already exist. Uber is basically a slightly more convenient way to get a taxi. Order food online is slightly more convenient to even going to the store. But if you worry about where kind of your next meal is going to come from, probably that is not your sort of biggest concern. So, and I'm going also towards the fintech and those type of things. Like there's a lot of companies that are doing innovative work in the data science space there. Like a problem that a lot of people have is just getting access to credit, because people don't have bank accounts, they don't have credit records. All the traditional sort of methodologies in giving credit are based on official credit records. So there's companies that are looking at using your cell phone data to give you credit. So if you regularly pay your cell phone bills and regularly buy airtime, you have a lot higher chance of being credit worthy. And so just based on that data alone, you can say, okay, we can issue you with a loan. And that is obviously something that can impact a lot of people. Somebody wouldn't otherwise be able to get a loan, can get one and be able to start their own business. There's also dangers with it, where might give credit to someone who shouldn't, will basically have sort of bad consumer behavior. And there's also things around insurance. A lot of people don't actually have access to insurance, and it's the same type of process as a traditional system of how the underwriting is done. And if you don't have certain things on record, then you can't get insurance. So also now companies in the fintech space that are looking at using other types of data to underwrite you for your life cover or that type of thing. Any question?
So just what's the engagement process if you want an AI solution as an entrepreneur?
The engagement process if you want to create an AI solution. Okay.
I think, yeah, so usually you have like a cold start problem. So you won't actually have any data to start with. So you build an AI solution. So one, definitely second that partnerships are great. Nedbank or whoever else you can partner with, because then those people already sit on the data. If you can bring the idea and the innovation in. Otherwise you need to get some way to get people to give you the data, start giving you the data. Or just build a service where people send you documents. Maybe you don't have any AI tool at this time. Maybe you just have people actually sitting at the back and processing the things. But in that way, you start collecting the data, and so it becomes the way you kind of scale.
Okay, great. I think any more questions? Okay, let me just final comments very quickly, just on some of the questions there as well. You talked about youth as well. My son sits here as well. How do we get them involved? These program games, and I think that's an interesting way of getting them involved. I just exposed him a few years ago, and now he's doing his own thing. He can learn on YouTube and the internet. I don't need to teach him. He can show me now some stuff there. So, but again, access to the internet. You need to open it up. You need to have access to gaming environments, whatever. So that's important. Anyway, just on entrepreneurship, Elon Musk has got the saying, when you look at an entrepreneur, it's like looking into an abyss and chewing glass. Well, when you build business, and there's a few people that's building businesses. I've built, well, Philip also knows about C-Sense, and I'm building Cortex Logic now as well. So you're going through that. Obviously, you can leverage the experience, the network, the skill, everything there. You got to know your market, your customer. We live in a very different world to even the 2000s and before. It's the age of platform businesses. When I was at Techstars last year, I was a mentor for some of these. There's a lot of fintech startups, and literally all of those, the 10 that were selected, they were all data-driven platform businesses, and immediately, do they have the skills to actually manipulate the data, to actually create, operationalize AI, to create end-to-end solutions? And it was kind of, there was a few of them, there was more AI companies as well, but it helps, and they've got some data science, but a lot of them don't have those skills. So you need to have those skills. So skills are very important. So you've got to have the right people to implement, to operationalize. And what we do, even with corporates, and I think we talked about, I think they struggle with silos. They struggle with they struggle to operationalize. There's some guidance needed there. Only you talked about enrichment as well. So that's a further step. But they already struggle with the data that they've got available. They maybe get data from TransUnion and there, but when they send out offers to customers, it's not connected to data at all. They don't have a 360-degree view of the customer. Well, that's like a vision. It's not real. So most companies, most customer-facing companies are really struggling with that. So the broader vision is to obviously have rapid access to all available data, structured and unstructured. And if you think about the machine learning toolboxes that we've got now, we've got deep learning, we've got all these techniques that can deal with audio, video, text. So not only the typical numerical data, there's a slide that I sometimes show where you see data being generated at exponential rate, you see data utilization at linear rate. That gap is increasing. And now we've got IoT, and the world is being instrumented more. So we're working with a bunch of corporates, and one of the corporates, they actually want to look at the whole value chain, and they want to simulate the whole value chain and stuff, and that's the potential. So, but to do that, you need to instrument the business on all ends. People, customers, you need to have a lot of IoT devices, and then you create an incredible situation where you can unlock value. But, okay, I think we're going to conclude here because we set 8 o'clock, and it's, so I would just want to thank everyone for your participation. It was really good. We are going to share this. I'm also going to share the initial presentation. And thank you very much for your participation. So there's time afterwards. I think there's some food still and drinks, I'm not sure. I just want to thank LaunchLab specifically. I think you guys were awesome. We had some great events here in the past. And the quality of discussion, I want to thank the panel. All of you, is high quality inputs. And we can just say thanks to the panel here as well. Awesome. Thank you very much. Have a good night.
I know.